We are now live, and I want to welcome distinguished ladies and gentlemen who are joining us for these 2020 Nigerian Gas Association Industry Multilogues. We've called them that because these is intended to start a series of conversations around two main topics or themes, if you want, that would lead us into the main conference of NGA next year, 2021. No thanks to the COVID, as we all know, we're not having a physical event. We're not having the main conference in 2020. My name is Richmond Osuji, and I welcome you to this year's virtual event. Now, because of the fact that we're running a virtual event, I may not be able to recognize everyone until it's time for them to speak to you. But I want to say this, that we cannot but appreciate the dedication, the commitment, and sterling leadership of our president of the NGA, who is also with us live this morning. Let me say warm welcome and salute to Madam President herself, the one I call the leading lady of gas, Mrs. Audrey Jo Ezigbo. Good morning, ma'am, and welcome to this event. To all of our speakers, we welcome you. We thank you for finding the time to be with us here today and tomorrow. We appreciate our moderators who are also sparing their time to coordinate this session conversations that would follow the presentations. We cannot but thank immensely our sponsors. Without you, NGA wouldn't be doing what she's doing today. We won't be doing what we have done in the last over 20 years. Particular appreciation would go to the Nigeria LNG for being the founding landlords, if you like, of the association, and for being dedicated to the association these past over 20 years. We appreciate Shell as well for their leadership in the gas business and to the NGA and for sponsoring this year's event as well. Axela, we thank you as well for your continuous support and partnership, being a member company of this great association. So distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we welcome all of you. We're just going to go swiftly now into the main business of the morning, which will be a welcoming by the president of the NGA, joining us virtually as we all expect it will be. I want to yield this virtual platform to our hard-working president. No longer the first female president in just calling, but she has proven above and beyond the call of duty. She has excelled on this job, and more women should be given more roles of responsibility. Madam President, what a delight I have to welcome you to talk to us this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Audrey Jo Ezigbo. It's over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Richmond, for that introduction. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and a very distinct pleasure to welcome you all to the first ever multi-logs of the Nigerian Gas Association, as we take new strides towards driving gas utilization via the NGA's advocacy-led initiatives. Now, for those of us who might not be as familiar with the NGA, the Nigerian Gas Association is the apex organization that represents the varied and numerous stakeholders in the gas sector within Nigeria's gas industry. We are not-for-profit, we are non-governmental, we are a non-political association formed in 1999 to promote the advancement of Nigeria's natural gas as the preferred energy source, while still serving as the premier platform to champion the development in gas in Nigeria for the benefit of the nation and the various stakeholders in Nigeria's gas value chain. NGA is the largest gas-focused and individual member volunteer organization, the umbrella association and the voice of the gas industry in Nigeria, and we are a chartered member of the International Gas Union. Now, as the premier association in the industry, NGA is continuously and actively championing the competitiveness and utilization of natural gas by promoting sound policy articulation, capacity development, and of course, best practices that are targeted at optimizing the economics of the gas value chain. So we're looking at issues from transmission and distribution, utilization and power generation, commercial and industrial transportation issues, to of course the environmental, legal and fiscal aspects of the gas industry operations. And we're very intentional about creating platforms for the advancement of knowledge and learning through fit-for-purpose thoughts and capacity building trainings, such as these ones, for disseminating industry information to members and the broad public. Now, what we want to do at our core is to ensure that gas matters are properly addressed and that the understanding by the government and the public of gas and its impact on the economy and our people is enhanced. Indeed, this is the objective that underpins our gatherings over the next 2 days. As the NGA, we are very clear that Nigeria has the potential to be a gas superpower. We hold the largest gas reserves in Africa with approximately 203.16 TCF of proven gas reserves and another 600 TCF of unproven reserves. Now, we play significantly in the global gas market, specifically for LNG. And at this point, I want to stop and congratulate one of our sponsors, founding members, and a very dedicated partner to NGA, the Nigeria LNG, for the award given to them recently by the World LNG Association. Now, we want to look at the domestic front and see also that even within the country, gas is already being leveraged, albeit far below capacity, as an industrial fuel and feedstock. So we're using gas in country already for power generation and for other industrial processes. And these are through a range of fixed and virtual delivery solutions. So we have pipeline gas, LNG, compressed natural gas, some natural gas vehicles, and various LPG applications. Now, we as NGA, we recognize and we continue to advocate for a deepening of our domestic gas markets because we recognize that our true wealth as a nation doesn't lie in the abundance of the resource, but as in how extensively we're able to apply it towards various value-adding processes across different residential, commercial, industrial, petrochemical, agricultural, and other such sectors. So 2020 was declared as the year of gas by the Honorable Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Chief Timi Silva. And the government then went on to back this declaration with a series of notable actions, amongst which are the launch and operationalization of the Nigerian Gas Transportation Network Code, the progression of the National Gas Flare Commercialization Program, the National Gas Expansion Program, and so on and so forth, the Gas Pricing Review Program that is going on, and the progression of some key infrastructure projects. Now, all these speak clearly to the efforts being made by the government to walk that talk of deepening natural gas penetration in the country. Although these are laudable, the Nigerian gas industry is still constrained in many ways, as we know, as much bedeviled by legacy issues as it is with new challenges that are evolving. So from commercial issues to infrastructure issues to issues around policy direction, formulation and implementation, to legislative issues and the lack of the clarity on the fiscal framework surrounding gas. And then, of course, compounding these issues are the broader macro challenges that we face and global challenges that have impacted on the gas industry in Nigeria. So from the twin shocks of the pandemic and the oil price crash to the economic recession that we are currently facing as a country, when we've really literally barely had time to catch our breaths from the last recession that we came out of. And of course, this is compounded by the growing distancing of global investment capital from hydrocarbon projects. Now, these all bring to the fore, once again, NGA's continued advocacy for the rapid acceleration of the pace and the scale of our national programs and interventions relating to gas, and the need to fashion out commercially attractive fiscal frameworks backed by appropriate legislations to ensure that we can literally begin to see the much needed investments and depth in our domestic gas markets, a situation which, if we can achieve, will significantly address many of the socioeconomic headwinds that we grapple with as a nation. So there are two critical levers on the table now. One is pricing and the other is legislation, by which I refer to the ongoing sector-wide gas pricing review effort by the Ministry of Petroleum Resources, and secondly, the progression of the almost 2 decades in the making Petroleum Industry Bill, which is expected then to provide this much needed legislative backbone to investors in the gas industry, the kind of investors that as a nation we very much need to come to the fore to champion the development of gas production and the attendant value chain infrastructure projects. It is based on our appreciation of the criticality of these two bodies of work that we have curated the NGA 2020-2021 monologues, and this multilogues rather, a novel solution-driven series of stakeholder-led deep dives themed Achieving Consensus Pricing for the Natural Gas Value Chain in Nigeria for day one. And of course, tomorrow we'll be looking at the PIB dialogue, Crystallizing Sector Legislation to Spur Wider Development. And we have with us over the next couple of days a rich array of industry experts as speakers and panelists who are going to be sharing their insights and their expertise on these subjects. distilling the issues and proposing actionable strategies which, if we adopt, will enable us progress this rapid catalyzation of the attainment of Nigeria's economic recovery and growth agenda, leveraging on our gas resources. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, before I hand over to our eminent moderator and panelists, who are the ones really charged with the responsibility for doing the talking today, let me anchor my thoughts here at this time by commenting on the pronouncement by the Honorable Minister of State for Pronouncement for Petroleum Resources of the Decade of Gas. This pronouncement is one that, as the NGA, we've advocated for a long time, and so we say a big kudos to our minister and his team for this pronouncement. We believe that the time is ripe, and that there are actually quick wins that can be attained as it relates to our national aspirations for energy access, availability, affordability, sustainability, as pertains to the acceleration of our non-oil revenue generation, the industrialization and economic recovery, generating employment, and so on. However, we recognize that the attainment of significant milestones within and at the end of this 10-year period is going to be a function of many things. It's going to be a function of consistency, a function of an unwavering focus, a sustaining of the momentum, irrespective of changes in leadership. It's going to be a function of partnerships and collaborations, and of course, the stability of the operating environment, the regulatory and fiscal environments, amongst other factors. So as NGA, our commitment is that we will continue to foster the attainment of these as an association across our membership and in partnership with the government. And so we have a long way to go, and we know that we all have our parts to play. We actually see Nigeria as sitting very precariously on a tipping point, and we need to be sure that in partnership with the government and the private sector, we can place the weight on the right sides of imperatives to ensure we actually roll forward into an unprecedented level of economic recovery on the back of a gas revolution, rather than rolling the other way into further economic. So that said, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you all once again, and I want to invite you to sit back and listen to the very broad and astute discussions that will begin shortly. I look forward to a robust question and answer session immediately after the presentations and the panel session. And it is my earnest wish that each of you who has taken the time out of your busy schedules to be here today is going to leave further enriched for having attended these sessions. So distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for listening, and I wish us all fruitful deliberations. God bless you all, and God bless our industry and our dear nation, Nigeria. Thank you very much. Richmond, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, so there we have it. That is the Madam President of the NGA and also co-founder and deputy managing director of Falcon Corporation. When she speaks, I tell you, if you are gas, you will be delighted that such intelligence, such skill, and a woman with such great articulation is representing gas today in Nigeria, talking us through why we must deepen domestic gas penetration and why we must balance the scale and ensure that we provide the right commercial and attractive policies to ensure that we utilize our gas resources, perhaps eliminating completely. So thank you so much, Mrs. Audrey Jo Ezigbo. We appreciate you. Okay, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we're supposed to be taking the Honorable Minister of State for Petroleum at this time, but because there is another event happening concurrently, we're unable to take him at this time. So he sends his regards and apologies. But I will quickly, before I take the next speaker, I want to quickly just take a short video presentation of our sponsors. For this event, we have three main sponsors. We have Axela, we have Shell, we have the Nigeria LNG. So for the next 3 minutes, I want you to just keep your eyes on the screen and let's tell you a short story of the Nigerian Liquefied Natural Gas Company and the Shell companies in Nigeria. And I'll be back to introduce our next speaker. And then, of course, you will appreciate and understand why the Nigerian LNG, as Madam President reminded us, was recently awarded the World LNG Award for outstanding contribution to the industry. And of course, we also celebrate Shell, whose long-standing partnership and commitment is also, I know partners as well they are with the Nigerian LNG and the NNPC to produce that company. So we thank our sponsors, we appreciate them. Axela is also a sponsor for this event. Axela, we thank and appreciate you as well. Very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, today we are discussing, today and tomorrow, we're discussing issues around gas pricing and the PIB, as Madam President reminded us in her speech. Now we're switching gears to the Oil Producers Trade Section, OPTS, of the LCCI, a group of oil producers in the Nigerian oil and gas industry. Chairman, Mr. Mike Sangster, is unable to join us as the chairman of OPTS, is unable to join us this morning. But I think the best decision was taken in getting his representation, because he's represented this morning by the chairman, OPTS Gas Subcommittee, and also a GM with a Seplat. I'd like to now yield this virtual stage to our next speaker, Mr. Okechukwu Mba. Okay, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Richmond, and good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today. I will make a short speech, and I'll be making the address on behalf of Mr. Mike Sangster, Chairman, OPTS, and the subject is on achieving consensus pricing for the Nigerian natural gas value chain. So, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of OPTS, an arm of Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, I thank you for the opportunity to present our views on consensus pricing for the Nigerian natural gas value chain. I will start by telling you a bit about OPTS. OPTS is an industry group operating under the umbrella of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We represent the interests of 30 oil and gas companies and operate approximately 90% of Nigeria's oil and gas industry production in partnership with NNPC or other local and international leaseholders. As the cornerstone of exploration, development, and production of Nigeria's petroleum resources, our collective objective is to strengthen the long-term health of the industry. Nigeria, with the largest oil and gas reserves in Africa, has huge untapped potential to achieve its economic development goals, gas to power ambitions, and transitioning to a gas-based economy. The country currently has the world's 10th largest gas reserves, possessing abundant resources capable of satisfying both domestic demand and export requirements to make gas a catalyst for economic development. However, it ranks 17th in production. So 10th in reserves, but 17th in production, leaving many of its resources untapped. These resources represent huge potential for Nigeria to boost its economy. Each dollar invested in gas could increase GDP by as much as $3, driven by solutions including the use of gas as fuel for power generation, cooking, and transportation, or as feedstock for fertilizers, plastics, and other industrial applications. Unlocking the potentials of gas for the economy relies heavily on an efficient gas value chain, including an adequate midstream infrastructure, free market-based pricing for gas, cost-reflective tariffs, and payment assurance and guarantees to producers. Currently, the Nigerian gas value chain is plagued with challenges which prevent gas investments and developments that would otherwise enable the transition to a gas-based economy. Some of these challenges include inadequate infrastructure to transport gas or electricity further down the value chain, sabotage of existing infrastructure, and with gas and power also prone to theft. In addition, the industry struggles with huge and long outstanding debts, unsteady offtake, frequent downtime, and regulated gas pricing. Transitioning to a gas-based economy, which is our dream, will require that these hurdles be overcome. This can only be done by developing adequate infrastructure to deliver gas to off-takers, ensuring sufficient funding to develop projects, dealing with payment arrears to boost investor confidence, providing enabling and commercial fiscal terms, and ensuring a conducive business environment. In line with the topic of today's session, let us focus on pricing, which is also a source of discussion regarding the current PID. The subject of gas pricing remains critical to Nigeria in the current environment, where gas has become a widely accepted alternative for energy, especially in light of energy transition. To demonstrate its importance, the NAPIMS invited all industry stakeholders to make inputs into the gas sector-wide review of the domestic gas pricing framework towards actualizing the very important objective of the federal government, which is to expand the utilization of natural gas and associated derivatives as a catalyst for industrial growth. To address these subjects, OPTS recommends that the transition to market-led pricing with a full willing buyer, willing seller regime be implemented in the time frame of 2 to 3 years. A market-driven regime will encourage competition and attract investments into the country. In the meantime, gas prices should be set at a price which is cost reflective of the investments that do go in, and in addition, provide a decent return to ensure investors and investments are encouraged. This will enable investment and encourage further development of the Nigerian gas industry. OPTS recommends that the 3-tier sectorial demand segments of power, gas-based industries, and commercial be maintained, and the domestic gas pricing framework should not be linked to export parity pricing. In parallel, domestic gas supply obligation, the DSO arrangement, should also be capped at the current multi-year levels and discontinued after 2022, which is the end of the current multi-year allocations. This will represent a major transition milestone to a liberalized gas market in Nigeria, after marking 15 years of domestic gas supply obligations to upstream producers. Nigeria should also draw lessons from other countries and make its terms competitive to attract the much needed investments into the gas sector and stimulate the growth of our GDP. This is even more critical in low commodity pricing environments and in a situation of reduced capital flow to the economy. In general, a successful and timely development of Nigeria's vast gas resources, including its deep water resources, will require the industry and authorities working together as close partners to achieve its common objectives. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, therefore, it is our belief that accelerating gas development in Nigeria is key to boosting the country's economy. Nigeria needs to strike a balance between viewing gas as a source of revenue and, more importantly, as a catalyst for economic growth. The PIB poses a unique opportunity to make a step change towards the transition to a gas-based economy by enabling commercial terms that pave the way for market-based pricing in the near future. In this regard, it is expedient that the federal government's continued leadership to align a broad group of government ministries and industry stakeholders. On behalf of OPTS members, we appreciate the opportunity to present our views and thank you very kindly for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. Now, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I understand that a number of you on the call would like to ask questions. Now, not to worry, we'll have enough time to take all of your questions. Now, what I need you to do is go to the Q&A box. There's a Q&A box on this webinar. Go there and type your questions. Please do not use the chat box to type your questions. I don't think you have access to that. Just go to the Q&A box and ask your questions. Now, at the end of the panel, the moderator will be taking those questions. Of course, I'll be here to work with the moderator to take those questions. So as they speak, you think of a question, ask in the Q&A chat box so that you don't forget. Also, we have posted a link that would allow you to download the brochure for this event. Now, that has the detailed program for today and tomorrow in bios of our speakers, as time may not allow me to read out all of their bios before I bring them up to speak. So please do go there. In the chat box, we sent it to you. Go there, click, and download the brochure. It gives you insight into all that will happen here today and tomorrow and the bios of our speakers. Once again, thank you to the Oil Producers Trade section of the LCCI. Thank you so very much. We now go straight into the very next presentation. And as was said at the beginning, we're looking at achieving consensus pricing for the Nigerian natural gas value chain. We have a lead presentation, and our lead presentation will then take us into the panel conversation. But first off, let me begin with the lead presenter, and thereafter I will come back and bring up the panel members who will be discussing the respective papers. So right now, I'm switching gears. We cannot be talking gas and consensus pricing without the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation. We cannot also be discussing that without the Directorate of Gas and Power at the NNPC. And who better from that division to talk to us than the Chief Operating Officer himself, who, in spite of his busy schedule, has just jumped out of a meeting. I see someone is asking us to share the link. The link for the brochure is there in the chat box. It is there, but we'll share it again just in case you didn't get it the first time. Maybe you just joined the meeting. I understand you may not have seen it. So we'll just do that again. So who better to talk to us now than the Chief Operating Officer himself of the Gas and Power Division of NNPC. And I yield this virtual platform to Engineer Yusuf Usman. CEO, sir, the stage is yours.
Let me start by thanking the Nigerian Gas Association. As always, Nigerian Gas Association has been taking the lead in terms of promotion of the use of gas. By the way, very important commodity that God has endowed us with. And also the topic of discussion, which is really apt. The topic is apt for me, being the chairman of the sector-wide gas pricing review. And the topic is achieving consensus pricing for the Nigerian natural gas value chain. Very important topic because of a number of reasons. One, the industry is facing challenges at the moment. We are all aware of the COVID-19 pandemic, and this particular situation resulted in lower prices of commodities across the world and challenges in terms of performances of industries, jobs, and so on and so forth. Arising from this challenge, that prices are coming down, put so much pressure in the Nigerian gas market to also reflect on the dynamics that the world is seeing. And therefore, a number of off-takers has complained to government that the prices of gas in the domestic market is rising, which does not actually reflect the trends in the market. And because of this pressure, a committee was set up to look at the price. And that is one of the committees I chair. And therefore, this particular topic is so important to the workings of the committee. You cannot arrive at a reasonable price across the market without a consensus. And a consensus has to happen across the stakeholders. So, to be able to arrive at the consensus prices, what is very, very important is to actually determine what are the value drivers across the sector, including the drivers of the stakeholders. So to achieve a consensus, it means we just have to have alignment from the gas suppliers, alignment across the transporters, alignment across the distribution businesses, alignment with the off-takers, and of course, alignment with the stakeholders, including government and the Nigerian people. To achieve this type of alignment is a Herculean task because the value drivers are different. Some are looking to maximizing their profits. Some are looking to lowering costs so that they can also be able to survive in a very difficult environment. Some are looking at how do I survive and get myself out of the situation I'm in with respect to all the challenges across the sector. So that means consensus is key. And to be able to achieve consensus, what are those things we need to consider? It means you have to involve the entire stakeholders. You have to listen to the stakeholders. You have to receive the views of the various stakeholders and then attempt to arrive at some kind of balancing. And that will be able to help you in arriving at something that will be acceptable to the industry. So what are these challenges? I think we need to understand the challenges first. What are the challenges? The challenges are, one, the country needed to promote gas-based industries. We need power in the country. We also need to promote the use of gas for environmental reasons. And we also have to bring in this gas as an alternative fuel to the Nigerian citizens. We also need to listen to the industry, especially those industries where the input, the basic input for their manufacturing is gas. So you need to listen to all these sectors in order to arrive at a consensus. So it is important that we understand the value drivers of different entities. The other thing to look at is because I love comparison, and a lot of comparison has been made to a number of countries without necessarily looking at our peculiar situation. The bottom line of the entire business is revenues. You need to look at the capacity of the off-takers in order to be able to get your revenue back. And therefore, it is important you listen to the entities that are trying to resolve and ensure that your revenues come back, either by way of promoting or by way of supporting them to ensure that the sector is sorted out and the sector can actually survive. And that way, you'll be able to promote all the things you needed to do. So, we look at various models of pricing in order to arrive at the consensus. I listened to the OPTS that OPTS is discouraging actually pricing gas in the domestic market to export parity, without explaining Nigerians will be wondering, why can't I price gas to export parity? Especially when there is a perception that the export parity price is very low and the domestic price is higher. So it means we have to explain, why can't you link up gas pricing to export parity? If you just calculate the export parity and think that's the price of gas, then we'll be making a fundamental mistake. Because the gas that we use in the domestic market is usually dry. And the export parity price that everybody wants to link it up to is wet. So it means you are taking the price of dry gas inside a wet gas. And that explanation has to be made so that people understand that why can't I link this price to export parity? Because you are pricing a gas inside a wet condition. So what that means is you have to bring out that gas and dry it before you bring it into market. You can use export parity actually to price gas into the domestic market. There's nothing wrong in that. But will it bring complications? If it will bring complications, then there are other ways to do it. You can do a cost plus, which is one of those things that have been suggested. But the challenges of that one is data. You have to be sure of your data. And you cannot use data from one source. You have to use data across the value chain and also do some due diligence on the data. Don't forget that there is a complaint about high cost of operations, and everybody is doing to the best that he can to make sure that the cost of operation is lowered so that the price that will be transferred to consumers is good enough. Transition to willing buyer, willing seller. Yes, this is what the industry like to see, that willing buyer, willing seller is the ultimate. But can we jump into willing buyer, willing seller at this point? And I have my own view around this, which I like to share. If you are retaining a sector-based pricing, where you sell your gas to power, you sell your gas to gas-based industry, you sell your gas to commercial users. Because of the challenges across the industry, everybody wants to sell his gas to commercial users because these are gas pricing based on switching fuel. It means they can afford. What happened to the gas-based industry you are trying to promote? What happened to the power sector that we are trying to resolve? So on this basis, this particular sectors, the power industry, the gas-based industry, need to reach some level of maturation for you to be able to remove the ban so that people can go and play into a willing buyer, willing seller environment. So on that basis, I support the recommendation to retain the sector-based pricing. Actually, not even the three we have, to even introduce the auto gas, because we have just flagged up the use of auto gas, and that particular sector also need to reach some kind of maturation. So that auto gas should also come into the sector-based pricing in order to be able to achieve all the objectives that we wanted to achieve in terms of promoting the use of gas. The transitional period, there are many things to look at in determining how many years will you do in order to lift the market into willing buyer, willing seller basis. In the past, we look at infrastructure. Do we have a robust infrastructure to go into willing buyer, willing seller basis? That I can confirm to you today that we have made a tremendous progress in infrastructure. The key infrastructure we are looking to Lagos gas pipeline looping. I can confirm to you that that job is finished. We are in the commissioning mode. The second infrastructure is the OB3. As I speak to you today, I have 90 million scf of gas flowing through OB3, which means we have successfully commissioned the half of the OB3, from the midpoint down to ELP system. We are also making amount of progress in river crossing. Confident that by the end of the year, or first or January next year, that line will be through, and we can put in gas into the night. So the key major infrastructure are actually at the line of sight, and therefore it may not be a consideration for determining how long it will take us to go into willing buyer, willing seller basis. But there are other challenges. If you look at our projection based on demand for gas, power continue to play a significant role in terms of demand. As I speak to you today, and based on all our projections, power will be consuming 60 to 70% of our demand. And therefore, whatever you do in the sector, without resolving the power liquidity issue, then you will be working in futility. And therefore, for me, the key consideration is how long will it take us to resolve the power value chain. Once we are able to do that, then I think we are in the mode that we can go into a willing buyer, willing seller basis. So those are some of the things that we are looking at within the committee to ensure that we have a pricing that will achieve some kind of consensus and will reflect the market fundamentals. In terms of determination of price, in this type of circumstance, if I cannot link the price of the domestic to export parity, it means I have to look for a certain model. And the best model that would satisfy the yearning of the industry is to look at the various sectors and how can these various sectors return a rate of return, a reasonable rate of return that would satisfy the entire sector. And on that basis, you can calculate the pricing within the sector. And my belief is you should be able to achieve a consensus within the sector. So these are some of my thoughts around this particular subject matter, but I'll be more than willing to answer questions that will come up with respect to the topic. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish us very well in our deliberation. Richmond, over to you.
Thank you so much, our Chief Operating Officer of Gas and Power for the NMPC. Indeed, when you see industry captains with over 3 decades of experience giving you such insights, they don't just tell you why they are taking a position, but they also tell you why that position would work better for the industry, the larger industry, and ultimately for Nigerians. So we thank you immensely, our COO. Thank you so much. So we're going to just switch gears immediately and go over to our panel. And on this panel, I was trying to look at it. I think cumulatively, we're nearing 200 years of experience on this panel from across the oil and gas industry and also in the fast-moving consumer goods sector, who, if you ask me, are some of the very primary consumers of gas because of the industrial nature of the business they do in that sector. So immediately, just to tell you who our panelists are, I'm sure you would have downloaded that. But please, your questions, as I bring them up, your questions should start coming to the Q&A chat box. You will see there the Q&A chat box. It's there. Please start asking your questions. The CEO has asked for questions. Just ask those questions. With OPTS, we'd also be expecting your questions. If you want to engage with our president, do that as well. But all of those things will be coordinated by the moderator, whom I'll be introducing to you in a moment. So on this panel is our president and fellow of the Energy Institute, Mrs. Audrey Jo Ezigbo. She is on the panel. On the panel as well is Mr. Mike Sangster, Chairman OPTS, who is represented by Okechukwumba, Chairman of the OPTS Gas Committee. On the panel, we have the Chief Executive Officer of Flour Mills Nigeria Limited, and that is Mr. Omoboyede Olusoya. Mr. Olusoya is represented by Engineer Festus Omotoyimbo. Omotoyimbo is the head of technical at Flour Mills Group. And also on the panel, our COO, whom you've just listened to, is on the panel. Our moderator comes to us with over 2 decades of industry experience and currently managing director of Latmia Energy. She will be moderating this session. So I yield this virtual platform now to Olu Vehin. Olu, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And thanks for that kind introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this NGA multilogue on achieving consensus pricing for the Nigerian natural gas value chain. I'd like to thank Mrs. Audrey Joy Ezigbo and the rest of the NGA team for organizing this session. A little bit has already been given about me, but just to recap, I'm the founder of Latimer Energy. It's an advisory firm that supports clients on strategy and transactions and commercial transactions. Commercial transactions in the energy sector. I've spent the last 15 years developing growth opportunities and executing commercial and M&A transactions, as well as investing in the gas and renewable sectors across Africa. Now, for the topic of today, that Engineer Usman has so kindly launched. As we know, there is a strong link between access to energy, in fact, energy consumption, high quality energy consumption, and economic growth. Yet our gas consumption in Nigeria remains insufficient to drive resilient economic growth, which we urgently need to create large-scale, high-paying jobs for millions of Nigerians entering the workforce every year. Our significant gas resources, Oki already mentioned, we're the 10th largest resource holder in the world, could drive much of the needed economic diversification and industrialization. Beyond power, natural gas is a critical feedstock. It's critical for industrial feedstock and processes that produce materials like cement, steel, plastics, fertilizer, other petrochemical inputs for medical devices, electronics, and even clean energy technologies, such as solar panels, wind turbines, and electric vehicles. Because our conversation I thought that was important to highlight, because our conversation around domestic gas consumption is so dominated by power consumption, when really it is atypical to have the type of profile that we have for domestic consumption. Most places you see it split almost evenly globally you see it split almost evenly between industry and power. So in addition to substituting imports and exporting in addition to substituting imports like fertilizer, exporting these value-added products or materials have the potential to lead a new dimension in export-led growth for Nigeria, provided these gas-based sectors can compete globally. Today's discussion is going to focus on the gas pricing that we need to unlock investments, underpin a commercially viable gas value chain, and to accelerate the gas demand growth that we need in Nigeria. We're extremely fortunate to have this esteemed panel here with us today, and we're looking to hearing their thoughts on this topic. Our distinguished panelists are Mrs. Audrey Joy Ezigbo, President of the Nigerian Gas Association. Welcome, ma'am. Engineer Yusuf Usman, the Chief Operating Officer of Gas and Power at the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, NNPC, whom you've just heard from. Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Boye Olusonya, who's ably represented today, is the CEO of Flour Mills Nigeria, a major off-taker of gas. Mr. Okemba is the General Manager of Gas at Seplat. Seplat is one of our leading indigenous suppliers of gas into the domestic market. Mr. Oga Adejo Ogiri is the Executive Secretary of the Association of Local Distributors of Gas. Thank you all for joining us. I'll start off by talking about just going straight into the topic, right? That our gas market is in this process of transitioning to a liberalized market. We're not quite in a willing buyer negotiated pricing yet, which means that the bulk of our returns is somewhat of pricing is somewhat regulated. So the price, if you regulate price, you're also regulating the investor's return. It's somewhat regulated across the value chain. So it's not just for upstream players. We do that in transportation, in terms of regulating what kinds of tariffs we want people to charge for transmission and for storage and for processing. We do that also in the downstream space. So I'll start by asking the panelists, in addition to what Engineer Usman has already shared, to share your thoughts on the pricing methodologies that could enable not only the government, but also market participants to balance the affordability of gas demand against commerciality of gas supply during this transition phase. I'll start off with Mrs. Audrey Ezigbo, and then followed by Okemba and the representative from Flour Mills, and then finally Mr. Adejo Giri.
Okay, thank you very much, Olu. And let me say a big thank you to speaking on behalf of Mr. Sangsa, and of course our dear COO for his insights into this issue. Now, talking about pricing methodologies, I think that one thing we all agree on this panel is the fact that we have to get it right in terms of pricing. It will be able to enable gas development in the country, because this is the issue, that gas is an enabler of various sectors, and I spoke to that in my opening remarks. Now, when you look at Nigeria, as Oke pointed out, in terms of production and in terms of actual utilization of gas, we're actually, the Nigerian gas market is the least developed amongst peer nations, and this is something we also have to keep bringing to the fore. What we have seen globally is that countries and regions are literally moving away from the realm of regulated pricing into market-led pricing. So whether you look across Europe and North America, where the markets are fully, the gas markets are fully market-led, or you're looking closer to the Asia region from China, India, Malaysia, and the rest of them, you see that increasing push towards a deregulated market-led regime. But of course, in Nigeria, we haven't really seen that. And when you consider the fact that there is such a clear correlation between the pricing frameworks you use within your country, the depth and robustness of the domestic gas market, and of course the economic development, like Oke pointed out, the $1 to $3 correlation on the GDP side, it explains to some degree why we are where we are, and we have to be able to rethink that. So yes, like CEO pointed out, it's good to look at models and then try to contextualize it within your own peculiarities, and I think that is critical, and I know that's the kind of work that is being done. So when you think about Nigeria over the last 10, 12 years, 15 years, from the gas master plan even into today, we have to ask ourselves why we have not seen the kinds of supply side projects, the kind of midstream projects that would have enabled a broader gas supply in the country, and that would have taken care of a lot of the pricing conversations we're having today. And where we are now, we have to be able to do things very differently. So whatever pricing framework we come up with has to take this into cognizance. If we look at Egypt, for instance, and Egypt is a good example because they have gone through the same journey of regulated pricing and saw how that grossly constrained investments, and they had to do a quick turnaround. So you have a situation where in a very short timeline, within the same period that Nigeria was doing gas master planning and all that, we saw Egypt go into over 80 E&P agreements. In this time, we saw Egypt get the Zohr field, that's an offshore gas development project of over 30 trillion cubic feet in offshore, yes, about almost 1,500 meters of water. And within 3 years, they had delivered this project, less than 3 years. In this time, Nigeria has not been able to do the same thing. We don't have the infrastructure build out. And yes, the liquidity issues and all that continue to impact on the sector. I feel that price frameworks, yes, there's always the tension about what is the appropriate level of recovery and incentivization for the sellers, for the investors on one side, that will still ensure affordability for the buyers at the other side. But the economics have to be right for the investors. And then if we have more investors, we're able to then, over time, net off this issue of costing. So right now, we are the ones who are still telling ourselves the story about how great an investment landscape we are. The reality is that there are too many challenges within our environment that don't make for investors to be flowing into Nigeria, and we need to do a spin on this. So I think that in terms of looking at the pricing frameworks, we have to be looking at frameworks that ensure bankability, that ensure cost recovery, that ensure that the return on investment is commensurate with the risk, and then we have to look at things that ensure that we're not subsidizing one party at the expense of the other. So it has to be a value chain perspective. And I know that the committee has done extensive work around this because, as CEO pointed out, there has been a very extensive stakeholder engagement from the upstream all the way down to the user end. So what we expect that we have to be able to come up with a pricing framework that the market can bear, yes, but again, keeping in view, how do we deal with the issue of needing to incentivize investments in? And then again is why it's good to look at benchmarks. So just to wrap up quickly, I'll give the example of India, for instance, where India at some point, they had this subsidy regime in place, and for them it was about the build-up of their fertilizer sector. In Nigeria, we're looking at the power sector. So, but ultimately they had to walk back from that and rather channel the subsidies directly to the end user farmers. So these are some of the things we think that in looking at the pricing frameworks here, we should be asking ourselves in Nigeria, where do we want to channel incentives? You know, do we want to just keep hitting on the supply side when we need more people to come into the supply side, when we need to build up a more robust midstream infrastructure to ensure we can get gas delivery all over the country and not where we have gas prevalently in certain parts of the country? And then how do we do this using gas as an enabler to then incentivize the right side of the value chain rather than impacting on the on the investor side. So I just think that, you know, we must be sure that we have a long-term view. For where Nigeria is currently, gas will help to get us out of a lot of the problems we are facing, but only if we can bring more gas to the fore. So whatever price framework we'll be looking at, again, we encourage this rapid move towards the willing buyer, willing seller. Yes, we know that there are concerns and constraints around that. That said, it's the only way to go if we are to be able to really, you know, see the acceleration and deepening of our domestic gas market. So I'm going to leave that as my early comments for now, and then I'm sure that in the course of the subsequent discussions, we can do a deeper dive into some of the issues that I've raised. Thank you, Olu.
Thank you, ma'am. That's very important. And yes, I like the Egypt example because, you know, e-gas has transitioned and moved with the times. And when you look at Northern Africa, for example, I think gas is now 50% of their energy mix. And a lot of our models actually, especially our price aggregation model is from there. So we're learning, but we're not moving in the same direction and attracting the investments that we need to attract. So really good points there. Thank you. Then the next person on the list is Mr. Omotoyibo from Flour Mills to just share a few thoughts from the off-taker perspective.
Thank you. Good morning, distinguished members of the Nigerian Gas Association. It's a privilege, to share my thoughts with you concerning gas pricing at this critical time in our national history. Conventional gas pricing has been a burning issue discussed severally by industry players over the years without any agreed favorable price to the stakeholders. Yes, across the gas value chain, there are major economic conditions facing the policy makers and the commercial actors with stake in gas to power development in Nigeria in order to identify where the economics really align in favor of gas to power development and where they do not. As concerns manufacturing, the role that energy plays in manufacturing is enormous, and currently more than 50% of the cost of production is actually gas in terms of production cost. So it's an important topic that we have to actually deal with. Usman has dealt with the issue of the expansion in infrastructure, which is very key in order to address the issue of pricing, because we have the inland cities in Nigeria where we're still lacking in terms of accessibility to gas, but we can only achieve this if there is a good framework in terms of pricing. But there are challenges that needs to be resolved. For example, the LNG export versus domestic power sector trade-off is a critical factor that needs to be looked at, because domestic gas price in Nigeria, where it recently said at about 50 cents, is far below the minimum price needed to intensify the gas investments. And however, yes, increasing the domestic gas price to LNG net back parity level of about $4 to $6 might seem unlikely, but the incentives for gas producers with access to a viable LNG outlet will still favor export over domestic supply. Looking at Tanzania and I think Mozambique, where we have the LNG net back price about $6 to $8, in Nigeria about $4 to $6. So investors' interest in gas development could only be stimulated if fuel price is fully implemented, particularly among Nigeria growing number of domestic independent producers. Like I said, in the inland cities in Nigeria, if we have a volume aggregation, because some of those cities, the industry there might be at a smaller scale, but managing the volume aggregation in those areas might boost the demand, which was actually turn around to incentivize the investors in the gas industry to actually invest further. So I think also we need to look at eliminating some of the challenges in terms of the challenges the upstream and also in the downstream sector. Challenges in terms of a gas sales agreement, because there are no favorable enforceable gas sales agreements, in the industry. So that needs to be looked at as well. Also, in terms of can I say there's no transparency, in the sector, in terms of allocation. That needs to be looked at, because without transparency, people will tend to take back in terms of investing more. So there should be enough transparency in terms of allocation. I'm talking about NGC. That needs to be looked at as well. I think critically we need to see how we can look at the structure, okay, from the NGC, and see how we can encourage, the producers in terms of having transparency in the gas price.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. The next person I'll go to is Okimba from Seplat, as one of the big players in the sector. So what are your views on how you, as a market participant at Seplat, what are your views around this need to balance affordability with commerciality, affordability on the demand side with commerciality on the supply side, and during this transition phase?
All right, thank you very much, Olu. But just to emphasize today, I am sitting here as representative of OPTS, representing Mr. Mike Santa. So I'm going to be articulating the views of gas producers as a community, not just my company. From my remarks earlier on, I think I've really made the points that OPTS would like to make today. But I will just pick a few of the points that I made earlier and highlight them again. One thing that is clear is that there's broad alignment in the fact that we need to transition to a market-based pricing for gas, what we popularly describe as willing buyer, willing seller regime. We all agree that market remains the most efficient way of pricing any commodity or service. I guess the point of difference, if there are, is when is the best time for that. And what I would like to point out is we can't wait until all the conditions are perfect. If we agree that this is the way to go, OPTS view is that we have to start that journey early. And if you try to make a comparison between where we are today, say back in 2008, when some of the regulated policies that we implement today started. Today, we have a lot more producers in the domestic market. So you have a higher level of competition today. And competition does one thing, it drives down pricing. We've seen that in telecoms, and there are a lot of other examples. And across the world, and also in our sub-region, you've seen that transition into a market-based pricing environment. So the first point is there are more producers today. We also look at infrastructure, which we talked about a little while ago. The CEO confirmed that the looking of EPS is pretty much completed, going through commissioning now. OP3 is far advanced to be completed end of this year, Q1 next year. So talking of critical infrastructure, it is also coming into place. We know there are other challenges, but what we think is important to set a date and then work towards that date so that we can address these challenges with haste. Otherwise, we may just find ourselves losing a bit more time in trying to have all the conditions right before we move forward. And there's no way you will talk about pricing without talking about the demand, the revenue, and the payment. They all work together. And in COO's comments earlier on, he touched on these issues. And I quite agree with him on the points that he made. As gas producers, one of the challenges we do face is unsteady offtake, especially during the rainy season. So you have an agreement, a customer is supposed to take a certain volume per day. They are just not able to take it, especially in the rainy season. And there's a lot of uncertainty as to what volume they take from day to day. And you know, we produce from subsurface reservoirs, and they don't cope quite well with that level of uncertainty. A certain number today, 20% higher the next day, 15% lower the other day. It introduces the type of volatility that has impact on our subsurface reservoirs. And all of that point to the challenges in the power sector. Given, as we all know, 60 to 70% of domestic gas demand is underpinned by the power sector. So following through on the power sector reform is very critical. And I'm gladdened to note that a lot of progress is being made in this regard. One of them being the electricity tariff review, which has come into effect. That's a key part of the solution. Government is also driving deployment of prepaid meters. That's an important part of that solution as well. And we are beginning to see improved efficiency in collection of tariffs. So all this working together is the framework that needs to be in place to assure a very viable market. And there's progress on a lot of these elements. So we are just saying, since we all agree that it is important to go to a market-based pricing regime, and we're making progress on almost all the fronts, let's set that date and work towards it. And there's something it will do for us. It drives investment. We need a lot more investment into this market. We don't have a deep pool of investment locally. These investments are going to come from international investors and bankers. And they like to see the fact that each project can target to develop efficiently and be able to recover costs and a little margin from the market. If the price is regulated, it won't work for certain development. But if you have a market-based pricing arrangement, then you're able to focus on efficiency, develop your project, and fit within the pricing environment you have in the market. And you will see prices go down. That's the view of OPTS. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, it's really important to underscore the importance of the market, letting the market do its work with a light touch from the government side, and let's see how that could potentially improve or drive acceleration in the sector of gas uptake in the sector. And yeah, I'll come back to your points on the power sector and maybe some other ideas around how to diversify from that. I think the next person I'll go to now is Mr. Adejo Ogiri. In addition to your opening statement, I would appreciate if you could touch on your views, especially as a local. You're the one who has the your group will have the closest link, the downstream link to off-takers. So if you could touch on, this point that the COO made earlier around the need to continue with an aggregated sector-based price model that we have under the DSO. Whether that is still a valid pricing methodology given what you're seeing in the current market dynamics, and if not, what are your ideas on concrete steps to help us transition to a more, negotiated outcome that Oke was alluding to in his earlier comments. Thank you, Mr. Adejo Ogiri.
Thank you, Olu. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. So first of all, I think I'll just align my thoughts to what has been said so far on the consensus. I think there seems to be some consensus on the shift towards a willing buyer, willing seller market. And I just wanted also to align my thoughts on that because I think the advantages are obvious. We need to allow the market forces, determine how gas is sold, and because of the inherent advantages which only the market can take. Before I go to what you just said, Okay made a very important statement, or made a comment about swings in offtake, and producers or off-takers reducing their nominated volumes, significantly. And I thought that was something which the market, can solve. In a market-led model, you can have aggregators who sit in the middle, right? And because they have multiple sources, multiple off-takers, they can manage, the agreements within the allowed limits, to meet, the off-takers' variations, as well as not distorting the upstream supply. And those are the kind of things which a market-led environment will create. You just see people coming in, not necessarily producers, not off-takers, but just using various instruments and using, various market-led mechanisms to solve the kind of challenges we're seeing today, where we're having more or less point-to-point supply from producers directly to off-takers. So just to point that out. But to your question, yes, just to say that the aggregated sector-based pricing model, which we've had so far, and just to give some context, right, had its uses, and one of the key objectives of that policy was to develop and nurture some critical demand clusters, which had the potential to catalyze the economy, and also the multiplying effects in terms of job creation. For example, the gas-based industries. We have seen a significant progress when that policy came into being some 10, 12 years ago. The consensus now is around the switch to a market-led, willing buyer, willing seller model, as we call it. In the interim, I will still support, yes, that we maintain that just in the interim, right? But quickly, transition towards the market-led model, so as to realize the full benefits that we have seen, full benefits we can get from the sector. For example, just one of the, you also talked, so that's one. You also talked about what are the concrete steps which we can deploy, to accelerate transition towards a willing buyer, willing seller market. We already have significant volumes in the market. We already have a significant number of players and off-takers. I heard the CEO talk about the need to solve the liquidity issues around the power sector. Power sector being a key off-taker of the market. But perhaps a suggestion, right? And this is my personal suggestion, could be looking at, for example, the downstream commercial sector, where which I would say is pretty mature. The liquidity, we have fairly good payment history, and there are quite a few number of players in that sector now. Perhaps it's and accounting for just about 20 to 30% of the market. Perhaps one of the ways would be to have some kind of staggered liberalization, where we, transition that part first, right? And, since that market really is seen to be the part of the market that can actually absorb market-related prices, as long as they are within or as long as they are cheaper than the alternative fuel, which we think the current prices are. So that could be one approach, right? To have some staggered plan towards a willing buyer, willing seller market, starting with some certain sectors. And then the others are the key, just the signaling, creating the right signaling, the right policy consistency and clarity, which the NG president talked about. And, even when we talk about timelines, ensuring that we keep to those timelines and not introducing new conditions much later, so that we can give the right investor confidence towards this market. So I would end there by saying I support the transition to willing buyer, willing seller market. I think we can start off gradually, with some sectors that are a bit more mature and can absorb higher prices, as well as also emphasizing the point which I think Madam President alluded to, and where we need to support, the sectors we need to support. Perhaps the right approach may also be actually using subsidies to target instead of doing price which distorting the price which distorts the entire market. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You touched on so many points there around all the key elements and concrete steps that we can take to accelerate this transition. I mean, you're right. There seems to be a consensus on the need to transition to a market-led gas market or market-led pricing for the domestic market. But what we're saying here now is, what is the timing? What are the actual concrete steps? So that will bring me back to the COO of Gas and Power at NNPC. Sir, I have a question around, just the certainty and stability of the fiscal and regulatory framework, which Oga touched on just shortly a few minutes ago. It is really an important driver for investments. We are witnessing, you've touched on so many of the points that are being made, and we're witnessing such the much needed sense of urgency from this administration on driving domestic gas utilization for economic growth. In your opening remarks as well, you mentioned, the need to balance various value drivers of various stakeholders in order to achieve a consensus pricing. So value drivers on the government side will include government take, investor return, affordability of gas for certain strategic sectors, liquidity of the power market. My question is really around what are the things that the government, and we've talked about in general, the President, Mrs. Ezigbo also mentioned the point that, all of this is happening not in isolation in Nigeria, but within a larger context of changing global gas market dynamics, that we need to be much more competitive in order to attract capital. People have other places because of improvements in technology, other ways and other places to invest their capital. So regulated returns are not necessarily the best way to attract people here. So in your view, what are the sort of things that government will do? So will, for example, government consider reducing its own take to stimulate investments and attract and, offer incentives to attract not only the right types of gas investments into the midstream sector, because when Mrs. Ezigbo is absolutely right, we've already focused on upstream when there are a lot of bottlenecks further down, especially in the midstream area. Would the government reduce or consider reducing its take in a sense to lower its take of government on the gas, the gas price itself, in order to stimulate and grow the pie, so that it has a bigger share, there's more economic activity, and there's more taxable economic activity that the government can then have access to from that? Or instead of regulating return and price. And then on the power side, it's definitely an improvement that we are trying to increase tariffs, but we know that affordability in that stage in that sector is a challenge because the bulk of it is used residentially, not in industry and not in commerce. So what are the ways in which government is also thinking about making sure that we move away from this over-representation of the power sector as a gas off-taker and start incentivizing investments and growing gas demand in gas-based industries that need it for input for all the other things that we talked about that could also lead to export growth? So in other words, in addition to trying to address the liquidity issue in the power sector, is the government thinking or have their initiatives to also try and grow other sectors that can sort of counterbalance our overexposure to the power sector? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I think, and that's why sometimes when you have limited time, there is a lot to say and there's a lot to talk about with respect to this very, very important commodity. And I say this commodity is gas. Okay? And I always say that gas is a catalyst for sustainable development. So it is so important for this country. But without wasting much time, you talk about affordability and commerciality. And I think we need to dissect this thing a little bit. Also, I had so much talk about willing buyer, willing seller, and regulated price. Let me confirm today that the two are playing actually in the current market today. There is regulated price only with respect to DSO volumes.
Right.
Anything outside DSO volumes today is a willing buyer, willing seller basis. So actually, the two models are happening as I speak. Now, what have we seen? Somebody talked about it earlier on. We looked at the market and we know that power is about 60%, commercial and industry are sharing 20-20. All the willing buyer, willing seller basis dynamics is happening in the commercial sector today. So I completely agree that the commercial sector would love to see a willing buyer, willing seller dynamics, which is good. But it is also the sector that can afford because of its switching power. Those other sectors don't have this flexibility of switching. So on that basis, you just have to look at what is happening today. If you look at our gas supply today, there has been a lot of talk that we park most of the cheap gas into exports, where we can actually have some flexibility in terms of pricing. We are mopping it out, a lot of it into exports. So these are some of the things that we need to look at. Today, on the average, we produce about 8 BCF of gas. 3.5 BCF goes to export. At what price? Export parity. Okay? 2.5 BCF is going to injection to produce more oil. At what price is debatable, maybe 0. Then a certain percentage is going to fly. At what price? Maybe 0. So the only sector that we are having conversation today that must have a cost reflective price is domestic, that is just consuming 1.5. So sometimes it's good to dissect what is happening to gas. If I have 3.5 BCF of gas going into exports, then it makes a lot of sense for me to benchmark prices to export parity. Because if you use the rule of the Pareto rule, the larger volume determines the price. But here am I say, don't go and benchmark gas price to export parity. If I dissect the export parity, I will realize that the price I will be able to get the dry gas into may be able to help the sector in terms of appropriate pricing. But I don't hear the argument of profitability, commerciality of the sector when I move gas to export. I don't hear it. I only hear that when I'm moving gas into domestic. And therefore, every cost has to be recovered. I have to make a certain profit margin and everything. So if you are sitting on the desk that I'm sitting, then it is compelling for you to look at the entire perspective and then be able to learn at something that will be acceptable to the industry. So having said that, just to give you a flair of what we are up to, can I price on export parity? Why not? Why not? If I'm packing 3.5 BCF into export. But will it provide some kind of challenge for me in calculation? Yes. Do I want to keep it simple? Yes. So if I want to keep it simple, to answer the question on commerciality, I now say, look, if I do a pricing that will return a 15% rate of return for you, then it's fine. Whatever price I come up with, then it's good for the industry while we are undergoing maturation. Now, the question to ask is, why am I in transition? I'm in transition because of myriad of problems. I showed a graph sometimes to stakeholders. And this particular graph is what am I actually receiving on gas sales to export and gas sales to domestic. Today, I'm receiving less than $1 from the domestic market because of debt. So it means the real price that I'm selling gas to domestic market is less than $1. The real price of dry gas in the wet gas that I'm selling for export is less than $1. So actually, conversation around price is a very strange conversation. If really the price of gas that I'm selling is less than $1, then anything above $1 would be good for the industry, so long as you can return back your revenue. And that is why we decided to concentrate and say, okay, how do we return back revenue? If you can return back revenue, then a lot of discussions around pricing to the upstream will be simplified. Because if the upstream is getting less than $1 and I'm able to return $2 to upstream, then upstream will be smiling because it's a fair deal. And that is why anybody who is trying to resolve the problem of getting the price back, because that's what will promote investment in the sector. I usually give people this example. When I go to look for money for AKK, and then I show them a cash flow, they say, but how much are you collecting? And they realize that what I'm collecting over the years is 30%. So they risk my cash flow back to 30%. And I won't be able to attract much investment in order to grow the sector. So for me, the key driver for investment is the return of revenue. If I can have a steady return of revenue, then we'll do a lot in the sector in terms of promoting investment. Now, why do we want to retain the sector for the transition period? Like I said, today in this country, gas is a catalyst for development. And if gas is a catalyst for development, what are those parameters? United Nations gave us 3 buckets of things that once you make an effort in these 3 buckets, then you are really attaining sustainable development. And what is it? You look at the environment. Your energy utilization, is it good enough or is polluting environment? Today, when you look at our energy mix, it's dominated by biomass, which is not good enough for a resource country that has gas that can reduce this. So which means we have to make best endeavors and effort to promote the use of this gas so that we switch up the energy mix in favor of gas. Now, you need to be able to provide food on the table for people. Now, how do gas play a role here? We talk of gas-based industry. I produce fertilizer. I produce fertilizer in the enhanced farming. So which means it's playing a role in putting food on the table for the people. So, and then power. Power is just at the heart of everything. So, if you look at it, to our stakeholders, which is government, what are key things for them? Key things for them are, let me have enough power that will generate so much revenue, and all this return in terms of gas sales will disappear. What will I do to actually enhance gas-based industries so that it creates employment and other things? What do I do to make sure that people can switch into use of gas, which is a commercial sector that is yearning for willing buyer, willing seller? You see? So to balance of this, that means you have to have some form of transition, and then you exit from the transition. Today, as I speak again, is the commercial sector is in willing buyer, willing seller mode. They can do that. But power, is power in the willing buyer, willing seller mode? I give you an example. The only willing buyer, willing seller basis we did was Azura. And the challenges around Azura is enormous. What did Azura return? It returned a gas price of $3.20 or $3 thereabouts, when the power sector is struggling to meet up with $2.50. So you allow willing buyer, willing seller basis at this moment, you will kill the power sector. But what are those recommendations that people can make? And we are saying that, look, you can buy wet gas. So we are promoting the purchase of wet gas from upstream. If you want to buy wet gas from upstream, then I needed to be challenged on why I cannot buy it on export parity. Because it's a wet gas. You take up wet gas from upstream, then you can have a processing that is reasonable. We have seen processing costs ranging from 0.35 cents to 1.5. So you can see, you can get a huge amount of savings if you are able to get a processing of 0.35. If you buy up your wet gas and you are able to get a processing cost of 0.35 cents, it's a huge saving for you. I have seen some power companies moving up to buy wet gas so that when they buy the wet gas, they can now pass it through a processing, and then they arrive, they pay their transmission tariff, and they have a reasonable price in terms of gas to their stakeholders. So there's a lot of dynamics that is happening in the sector, but we just have to survive the transition period. And once we are out, you see a lot of models that will come up when you go into willing buyer, willing seller. And that's why we want the willing buyer, willing seller basis. It will bring in efficiency into the system. It will bring in a lot of models into the market.
Yes.
But at the moment, we have challenge, and we need to resolve some of these challenges. And the major challenge that I've seen is, how do I get revenue back? That is the key driver to whatever we do. The tail end is the person you sell the gas to. The commercial sector is doing extremely well. Why? Because we put in some ATM, you buy your gas, your ATM card is finished, you cut off. You can't do that to power. So you have to begin to devise, because if you do that to power, you run the country in darkness. So there are so many reasons why a transition has to happen. And we need to encourage government, because government is doing a lot in terms of resolving the liquidity. Don't forget, they made an announcement that all the revenue is visible. It has to be visible, and they have to know how much you are returning back to gain costs, how much you are returning back to suppliers. They are making efforts to buy meters. Yeah, so the government is doing a lot in terms of zone. Don't forget also that any default in the power sector is on the neck of government. If you refuse to pay your power bill, it is government that will pay. So that is why it is important that that sector is sorted out. So those are some of the few thoughts I'd like to share, but it's important that we do a transition. Everybody wants willing buyer, willing seller basis. We'll get there. And then transfer. For instance, if you look at the supply portfolio we have seen, and don't forget, this is just a transitional pricing we are trying to do. Just 3 years.
Right.
In the 3 years, how much volume of gas do we see? Can we have this volume of gas into the market? Somebody was asking me, we need to promote deep offshore gas development within the transition period. You return a gas price of $3, $4. It's a challenge in the market. So that's why this particular consensus and trying to explain and reach a consensus is key. And that's why I like the topic that NGA has suggested. And it's a very good topic for sector to understand, for us to explain.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. So you've touched on a few points there, and we understand, as I said, a lot of appreciation for the urgency with which this administration is trying to drive gas utilization. And we understand all the difference from a policy perspective. And one of the questions in the Q&A box is just the different things that you need to balance on from a policy perspective and a developmental perspective on the government side. But I'm going to come back to Mrs. Ezigo, as well as Oke, and then Mr. Omotoyinbo. And this sort of final thoughts in just this order as well. And sorry, Mr. and Oga as well, Adejokiri. That, you've touched on an important point, sir, and which is the fact that, on the one hand, gas suppliers need to secure large-scale, credit-worthy offtake to access finance for this very capital-intensive gas projects. And on the other hand, suppliers like, commercial customers, whether you're in the power sector or flour mills, represented by Mr. Motoyinbo, need gas supply. And I think he mentioned that gas is about 50% of their manufacturing costs. So they need that to be affordable, and they need regular supply or assured supply in order to finance their own projects or expansion. So this chicken and egg dynamic has, impeded growth in the domestic sector. You mentioned that, we're able to export 3.5 BCF, but that is large-scale offtake, almost integrated, upstream plus midstream economics, with an export market that is creditworthy. It's a completely different dynamic for an underdeveloped domestic market that isn't an integrated player that's dominated by a lot of independent upstream players, and where you have somebody else who needs to also invest in the midstream infrastructure and all of those things. So those dynamics are slightly different. So I just wanted to, Mrs. Ezigbo, and as we are talking, again, the context, while we understand the government's drive for all of this developmental needs and the need to have a heavy hand in balancing pricing, that, there is a narrowing, the wider context, the global context is that there is a narrowing window of opportunity to access finance for these projects. Whether you're talking about gas supply or whether you're talking about infrastructure, mainly because of this climate change initiative, and because of climate change, and also because of and the need for financiers to now focus less on fossil fuels and accelerate the transition to a low carbon future. That will start to impact our ability to access finance, even if we're the most competitive on costs, and have the most attractive incentives. Some of the financing will just simply dry up given this emerging trend. So I just wanted Mrs. Jo Ezigbo to explain to the audience, how NGA is working with the government to drive advocacy in support of financing for gas projects, and for the OPTS rep, Okemba, to talk about some of their initiatives in that sector, in that regard as well, and how they're managing this chicken and egg dynamic. And for Mr. Festus Omotoyibo to also touch on this point, and Mr. Adejo-Ogiri in closing.
All right, thank you, Olu. Let me connect my response to a bit of what the CEO said. He was talking about around the issue of export parity. Now, our reality is that when we look at the export-oriented gas, and you've talked about what the dynamics around that are, it is a very different narrative when you are talking about the supply into the domestic market. There are so many add-on costs, and I think it's always important, especially when we have a mixed audience, for them to be able to understand this, that it's not just some people sitting down and ascribing cost of gas, just out of the blues, but that there are real costs that are attached. So there are costs of processing. Yes, we know that, because you're talking about the difference in specs between export gas and the DOM gas requirements. So there's stripping and processing that is involved in that. There are add-on costs based on the multiplicity of agencies that you have to get permits from on any single project, each of which adds on to your cost profiles. There are issues around the cost of your infrastructure itself. Dollar denominated, we have to import every single thing. And of course, we all know what the concerns are, the constraints are around accessibility of access to Forex, as well as the differential rates between, the currency of your investment, as well as the currency of your returns. And there's value erosion off the top from that. We know that there are big issues around security of assets. Mr. Omotoyibo, when he was talking, he also referred to the issues around the GSAs. So that even around bankability, securitization, there's so many things that just create a more significant risk profile and very direct add-on cost to bringing in gas into the domestic market, and sustainably so. And the only way we address this is to be able to deal with some of the legacy issues, and then of course bring more people on board. When we talk about export gas, we're talking mostly around the NLNG. The domestic players do not have the kinds of incentives that enabled an NLNG to succeed. And if those kinds of incentives are thrown at the domestic market, I promise you, you will see a lot of people coming in, and we might not have to be discussing pricing. So it's always good to put this comparison very clearly in place, so that a non-industry player understands exactly what we're talking about. And still to appreciate all the work that is being done, but I just thought to bring that into context. Because when you're now speaking also about how are we partnering with the government in terms of this issue of funding. So yes, as NGA, we are an integral part of the work that COO, as the chair of that sector-wide gas pricing review framework, is that is ongoing. We're part of that committee. We've made our submissions. We engaged consultants across board from our members internationally, did a lot of country comparison, and we've been in a lot of meetings, and the CEO alluded to that. He's given us the privilege of his time more than once to sit down and trouble the assumptions and giving a sense of direction, listen to our inputs and taking that on board. So for NGA, it's that high level engagement we're doing. But even as members, as you know, NGA is a volunteer organization. Our members themselves independently are in these conversations directly with prospective financiers, because these are the realities we face. Many of us have projects that are hanging because investors are saying, no, our entire countries are saying, no, we don't want to be doing any kind of hydrocarbon investments anymore. And we're having to deal with those narratives. So as NGA, what we do also is to make sure we're very visible. We're in different fora, all sorts of webinars, events, conferences. We would have been at the International Gas, the World Gas Conference. They were scheduled to hold in June this year, but they've just had to postpone it again to 2023 because of the COVID issues, 2022. And at such places, what we do is to actually set up a Nigeria pavilion where we bring on our members and we engage robustly with the different gas associations, with the different people that come on board to speak to the opportunities that exist in Nigeria and why it's important for them to recognize that for Nigeria, gas is our transition fuel. And so there's no need to be saying there's no need for investing in gas in Nigeria. When you're talking clean energy for Nigeria, for the Africa continent, gas is the resource that makes sense for today. And so we're constantly pushing this narrative forward. The government is doing its bit, but we also know that because we're privileged to be in direct conversations with many of those global investors, then we are also pushing that narrative as widely as is possible. And I'll anchor it there for now. Thanks, Olu.
Thank you. Mr. Okimba, if you could just touch a little bit on some of the points that, in just a response or as well as to the last comment, this last comment and comments that Mrs. Joy Zigo and Engineer Usman have made on behalf of OPTS. Please, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Olu. I listened to the comments that the CEO made, and I think the response from the NGA president addressed some of those. It's important to recognize that there's a difference between the export market, the NLNG market, and the domestic market. In my comments at the beginning, I highlighted some of the challenges that the domestic market faces, and Ms. Zibo also just went through those quickly now. So when you recognize the cost of processing gas to dry gas quality, which is what the power plants in the country require, and these challenges that I discussed, one of the things that go into valuing your gas is the liquid. And if the evacuation of that liquid faces a lot of interruptions, and a good portion of that is stolen as well, it impacts the economics. And to then make that project viable, you then have to recognize those. So again, when your payments are delayed for some time, they have an impact. So the NLNG model, again, with very steady offtake, payment at the right time, payment in USD, and all of that, there are differences. And that is why in some of the proposals we've made to the CEO, we've talked about the concept of adjusted EPP. So it's not as if the industry is totally against EPP. We are saying there are some adjustments you need to make to correlate those two markets before you can then compare the pricing. So those are the comments I would like to make on that. But with respect to the guarantees you require in the market, given the link between the sell side and the buy side to make it bankable and get the financing that you require, I would say you're right. The comments you made are right. It's like a chicken and egg situation, and on both sides there are financiers. One of the points I made earlier is that most of the investments that come into the Nigerian domestic gas market are international. And if you're an investor from somewhere outside the country and you want to put in money, you want to finance a gas producer who wants to develop a field, build a gas plant, the questions you will ask is the gas you will produce, do you have assurance that it will be taken from you on a steady basis? And if it's taken, you have assurance that you'll be paid in a timely manner. So those are important. On the power generation side, the customer, the power generator who's going to buy the gas, is lenders are also going to ask the same questions. around stability of gas offtake and stability of payments. So under OPTS, what we try to do, knowing that this challenge is there and also knowing that our local power sector has some challenges, is to be flexible on how we, and also support our customers, work together as a team. I mean, the COO cited the Azura example. That's an example that went through, and it took coalition between the gas seller and the power and the GENCO operator to work together to be able to meet those requirements that the lenders will require. But it's just recognizing that any lender will ask for those assurances or guarantees, and it is then up to us to look for innovative ways of making those assurances available so that we can attract the finances we require. As you rightly pointed out, financing into the fossil fuel sector is very constrained right now. So you're going to face a lot more scrutiny and more requirements, and we have to build our system in a way that we can provide lenders some of those assurances so that we can get the investments we require to achieve the much needed growth and use gas as a catalyst for economic development, as the CEO rightly pointed out. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay. I'll move this same question to Mr. Omotoyinbo, please, and then if Oga could help us wrap up. Thanks.
I think for assured gas and large-scale credit worthy offtake, we will achieve this, but I think there are a lot of things we are shying away in the country. There's no country that does not go through that stage of bonding in the gas sector, the gas industry. I mean, it stages from a vertical integration, competition in natural gas production, open access and wholesale competition up to the unbundling stage. This will enable participants at the retail level to be able to choose gas suppliers to open high competitive pressure, high market liquidity, and overall price transparency. But looking at the case of Nigeria, where government revenue is actually easily coming from oil, and that remains hostage to the fluctuation in the oil prices. So we struggle between return on investment for the gas producers and also revenue for the government. But basically, for sustainable development, I think we have no choice than to face the blue by the horn. We're looking at a backward integration to reduce pressure and the foreign exchange so that manufacturing sector also can as well earn enough profits so that the pressure on the gas cost will be less on the government and the stakeholders as well. Because looking at government, they will not take policy that will backfire in terms of what they will decide that will cut off revenue from them. Potentially, we have some gas projects that are not economic in terms of a policy that is being put in place by the government, because like uncertainty in the license renewal, joint ventures block, and also the more stringent fiscal terms, the Petroleum Industry Bill. So these are some of the policies that needs to be looked at so that at the end of the day, we can have a consensus price that is favorable to all the stakeholders. I think basically we need to look at that and also ensure that all of us agree in terms of going into the onboarding of the gas sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And then Mr. Adejo Ogiri.
Thank you once again, hello. So just to speak quickly to the issue around the narrowing window of opportunity to access international funding for gas. I think for me, this just reinforces the need for us to have a more attractive fiscal regime. And now, in our PIB, recognizing that there's a limited window for us to access international funding coming into our sector. So, there's still a room for us to ensure that the fiscals and the PIB reflect the situation we're seeing, as against when we started 20 years ago. And also to say, it's also, I think, also just begins to emphasize the need for us Nigerians to begin to think of also creating some Nigerian-based, I know we don't have that capacity, but just begin some kind of funding, that will be required for the sector, perhaps, or maybe an African focused, working with other countries in the region. Because for us as African countries, we cannot just jump on the climate change bandwagon. We need to use our resources to develop. There are consequences for us, economic consequences for us jumping on the climate change bandwagon. So it's important that African countries, and perhaps Nigeria leading other countries, to realize that we need to come together, pool resources, and direct funding, perhaps direct Africa-focused funding towards this sector because of the need, while freeing up our funds for other sectors that can get international finance. So I think it's one way to go. And then finally, just to say that closing comment is, as we go through this phase, through this transition, I think it's important to emphasize the role of regulation, the role of a competent, and efficient regulator that either during the transitional phase ensures that the right cost benchmarking is done, prices are cost reflective, no efficient costs are passed on to the market, until, and then when we get into the willing buyer, willing seller model, where that regulator has the capacity to efficiently also regulate, there will still be regulatory activities under that model to ensure that the market, come up with creative or innovative ways that can also lead to growing the market, because we believe the demand is there. What we need to do is just to create an enabling environment to attract the required investments to come into this sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to our panelists. I'm going to move it to the Q&A. Our audience have been patient, and it's been a very active Q&A box. Some of the questions have actually been addressed in the very extensive comments and remarks and responses from the panelists. There are a lot of questions around harmonization, around the PIB and various committees that are working on gas pricing. The need to harmonize that and make sure it's a little bit more consistent. And I think a few of the speakers have already touched on that. There was also another question from Mr. Akin Shoeton around the need to balance, the developmental needs and pro-poor strategies, which I think, Engineer Usman dealt with extensively in his points around the affordability of power in the power sector and demarcating between affordability and capacity to pay for the residential customers versus commercial customers. So that's been addressed. Thank you very much for that question. There was another question, and I think there are a few of these. Mr. Taj Shobayo was asking, and another attendee was asking a question around, if government is pushing for cost-reflective power tariff, then why is it resisting willing buyer, willing seller gas into the same industry when tariff is usually around 50 to 60% of feed gas? The power tariff is about 50 to 60% of feed gas. I think in some regards, Mr. Usman has already answered that question, but I will let him address that. And I think the other question to COO directly was whether, from Taj Shobayo, was whether there is going to be firm commitment of transitioning to willing buyer, willing seller over the 3-year projection that was mentioned. So I'll leave those questions on the table for anyone to treat.
Okay, you want me to come in first?
Yes, sir, if you don't mind. Please go ahead.
There are 2 questions that I was directed to me to address. First is, as government is pushing for cost-reflective tariff in the power sector, why are they resisting cost-reflective prices in the gas sector? Now, let me say this. The cost-reflective tariff is also in transition. I must say that. There are costs that consumers are not aware of that government is shouldering. And that is why the cost-reflective tariff they try to introduce is graduated based on the energy hours you get. If you receive about 24 hours of power, which means you are virtually getting power, then you have to pay the full cost. If you are receiving, let's say maybe 20% of the power, or 30 or 50% of the power, then you pay a certain cost. Then if you are receiving just as is, then probably nothing will happen to you. Now, so we have to understand that government is shouldering a huge amount of cost. I said it in the beginning, that whatever the default in the power sector is on the neck of government. And now we are in the situation where there is paucity of funds, so which means there has to be something that people have to see. But the most important thing to me in particular, and I've said it in many fora, is that people should have the discipline of paying for service. And I think it's very, very important. If you don't have the discipline for paying for service, then the distortion it will cause across the value chain is huge. We have seen some studies across African countries, and we see the performance in, let's say, Côte d'Ivoire, for instance. Côte d'Ivoire is returning an upward of 90% of service fees. So which means if you distribute electricity, you are likely going to get an upward of 90% of your revenue. That is the kind of discipline that we want. And once we have this kind of discipline, we are paying for our service. And I tell you, the investor will have confidence to put in more money. And then the more you put in more money and the more power is distributed, the things will balance out. And then people will be able to get a fair deal from the money they put. So that is why. So even the cost reflective tariff the government is yearning up is not meeting up with the cost. There is still some element of cost that they are shouldering. And that is why within the transition period, before all these things are sorted out, we have to show some understanding just to be able to survive the transition period. With respect to, which is the other question now, firm commitment. Yeah, firm commitment within the transition period that we should be able to jump into willing buyer, willing seller basis. Again, you know, like I said, the liquidity challenges around the power sector is something that government is putting all its energy. Probably it will even come before the 3 years that we are looking at, because the amount of energy and effort that is being put in this thing, I see a situation whereby we'll be able to get out of it even before the 3 years window that we put in. We can only put some element of confidence that this will work, and this is what I can share with you. I'm confident that within the 3 years that we should be able to have some kind of relief in the whole sector. Like I said, the commercial sector is behaving very well. At least our returns, our revenues has increased. So the commercial sector is at this point, is actually at the point of willing buyer, willing seller basis. They have no problem not to do that. The industry is also doing well, but for the industry, we can implement the same thing we are doing in the commercial sector. You put a control around your tap, because if I'm selling gas to fertilizer, and fertilizer is selling the commodity and they are getting their revenue, they have no reason whatsoever not to pay for the gas. The only sector is power, and the problem with the power is you can't cut it off, because once you cut it off, you put the country in darkness. And so the whole understanding that we wanted the industry to show is around power, and that's why we pay our emphasis and focus on power. Not that it is only the power that we wanted to promote, no, but because it is the only sector that is challenged today, and you cannot do anything about it because you don't want to put the country in the crisis. And you are also yearning for growth, and the key enabler for the growth is the power, and therefore we have to show understanding for the power sector to be resolved so that we survive the transition period. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. This has been an excellent session. I want to thank all our panelists. and our engaging audience members for the questions you've asked, and to just, and to have an enriching conversation today. I think in closing, I think where I'll summarize is just that, Engineer Usman opened by talking about, the way to achieve consensus was to balance, to first determine the value drivers of the various stakeholders, and then achieve an alignment of those drivers so that you can arrive at a consensus pricing. I think one good takeaway today is that there is clear alignment around the need to transition to market-led pricing, because that's the only way we're going to attract the level of investments within the time frame that we need to attract it, to grow this sector for the economic development that we need in the country. I think in the last, to bring home the point, Mr. Usman mentioned, Engineer Usman had mentioned that, there's a lot of energy that's being put into trying to make sure that that transition period is within the next 3 years. I think it's important to know that in the last 20 years, since Nigeria has been contemplating fiscal regulatory frameworks such as the PIB, NGMP, gas policy, now the National Gas Expansion Plan, we have now a gas flares commercialization. We put a lot of effort into monetizing this massive resource that we have for our growth. But in that same time frame, the market hasn't grown to where it needs to. We haven't been able to attract the investments that we need to attract. And that window is now narrowing. Yes, we're not a major contributor to climate change, but we are going to suffer disproportionately the effects of that climate change. And gas is one of our key ways of countering and mitigating some of those effects, not just in making sure that we have enough power for cooling and irrigation and for other things, but also just for our economy to grow. And so we have, transition from being transition to a middle income country. So a lot of these initiatives haven't led to the growth that we want to see. Is what is part of the conversation, is another form of alignment that we're talking about, despite our best efforts and all the stakeholders and a lot of collaboration from the government and from the private sector, and including the off-takers. And so the world is changing. The US and many other countries are now emerged significant drivers of increasingly an interconnected global gas market. LNG is becoming the major way gas is being traded. That wasn't the case 20 years ago. It's improved technologies, whether you're talking about shale gas, whether you're talking about mini LNG, CNG, and other ways to bridge this infrastructure challenges around virtual pipeline technologies are emerging, and many more players are emerging and taking and driving that global gas market while we're still deliberating. So it is really important, and it's really good to see on the government side the sense of urgency from Engineer Usman today, as well as the Honorable Minister's declaration of the Decade of Gas. It underscores the sense of urgency and decisiveness that we need to realize our potential in the gas sector, so we can unlock a brighter future, not for just the participants here, but for every Nigerian in this country. So for that to do, we need to be more competitive for investment capital within that narrowing frame, as we've talked about, and this transition to a low carbon future. Again, I'd like to thank my esteemed panelists for taking the time to share your experience, your ideas. I thank the audience for participating and contributing to this rich conversation. And I'd like to thank our hosts, NGA, for providing the platform for this very important discussion. Thank you very much, and have a great week.
Thank you very much, Olu. Thank you. Olu, you've done a fantastic job yourself, trust me, in moderating this panel. Stellar job you've done, Olu. Thank you so much. Olu, by the way, how do you pronounce your surname?
You'd have to pay for that. It's called Verheyen.
Verheyen. Oh, okay, thank you, Olu. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. She's done a fantastic job. Our panel members have not only left challenges on the table, they've all provided solutions from where they see it, but ultimately I'm delighted as a committee put together by government, which Madam President tells us the CEO is heading, that is trying to ensure that all of this is brought together, and NG is playing a leading role in ensuring that the concern of this industry and other stakeholders is carried along. So thank you all very much. Now, usually in a hall setting, I'll be asking the audience to give you a round of applause, but hey, they're all in their home. So on behalf of all who has joined us to listen today, This is your applause, distinguished panelists. I appreciate you. Thank you. Moderator, thank you. Fantastic job you've done. And then that will bring us to the end of today's multilog. Tomorrow is day 2. Tomorrow we're looking at PIB. Now, for those who joined late, I said at the very beginning that I heard a legislator on Sunday say to me with excitement that they are passing the PIB. Now, what are we? Where are we at? What are we looking at? And what are the concerns as of today of the industry? We're hoping to address some of those things, especially as it concerns gas. So, the president of the NBA, the Nigerian Bar Association, will be in the Zoom room tomorrow to talk to us. We'll also have the country chair for Shell. We'll have our president of NGA is back again tomorrow. OPTS chairman is also in tomorrow. The CEO of Axela will have tomorrow as well. We do also have the commissioner for energy and mineral resources for Lagos State. The group chief executive of Oil Data Synergy Group, Emeka Ene, will be moderating that session tomorrow. So hopefully we're asking you to go and sign on for that particular session, because you will not be able to log in with the same link you used today. So please sign up. I'm sure you've been informed by the organizers how you can get the link for tomorrow. You need to sign up to get that for tomorrow. So you go to where you did the same for today's link to get the one for tomorrow, so you get to join us and have that conversation. PIB has been one thing the industry has been waiting for with bated breath. Where are we and what are we doing? All of that we will find out tomorrow. So that said, want to thank our sponsors once again. Want to thank you, Nigeria LNG, Shell, Axela. We thank you so very much. And attendees, before you log off, normally at this time we'll say we're going on a lunch break. Yes, it is still a lunch break. So when you have lunch this afternoon, it's courtesy of NGA. Don't worry who paid or who cooked. Just know that we served you lunch at the end of our multilog today. Thank you very much. I'll see you tomorrow again, 10 a.m. Our speakers, of course, will be in before that time, but we'll open the room to you at 10 a.m. and we'll get to discuss PIB. Richmond Osuji is my name, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.